Hi, and thank you for joining me for another video. Friends, this week's Parsha is Parashat Behalotcha. And friends, in this Parsha we see that in the second parak it goes on to describe the cloud that covered the Israelites. It goes on to describe on how when the cloud rested, Israel also rested, reminding us in life that when God is obviously near, when things may seem to be going good, we stop, we rest, we put our guard down. And when we feel lonely or when troubles come, we feel the Almighty has abandoned us. So we get up and move and go to where we think God is trying to lead us, which we see was the case with the Israelites here. As a matter of fact, their picking up and moving was actually their statement of faith. However, we know that the cloud of fire eventually stopped moving when it settled over the Beit HaMikdash in Yerushalayim, reminding us of the words of David HaMelech, that whoever dwells in the shelter of the Most High will rest in the shadow of the Almighty. I will say of the Lord, He is my refuge and my fortress, my God in whom I trust. We even see that Avraham Avinu knew this well also. However, unlike the Israelites, he didn't have the cloud, but just a batko, a voice telling him that there's something bigger, that there's something better, to keep moving forward, to keep following it and not give up. Telling us, my friends, that if you're walking in Darchei Hashem, which is ultimately just walking with the religious, ethical mindset, as David HaMelech stated, no harm will overtake you, no disaster will come near your tent. And obviously, this is in retrospect, because what may seem like a curse today can turn out to be the greatest blessing. And friends, one thing that I can't forget to mention is that it's just as important to be able to know when the will of God is moving you as it is to be in tune enough to know when you finally get there, when you have finally reached your final destination. And this, my friends, is really how we can test if it's our will or God's will we're following. Something akin to, let's say, the career activist nowadays who doesn't really care what they're fighting for, but they just keep fighting because it numbs their reality. So friends, effort without reason is useless, my friends. And this really leads us to what we see in the fourth parak of the Parsha, where we see that after the Israelites were freed from Egypt, had a cloud blocking the sun from above, and were given manna and water in the desert, they continued to complain. And this, my friends, ties into our previous point, that in the micro level, they hadn't reached the promised land, but in the micro level, they were progressing accordingly, and really had no right to ask for anything more. And worse, they threw every act of love and kindness back at the Almighty, and even had the audacity to say that it would have been better if they were just left in Egypt. And this, my friends, is really a lesson that we as Jews today have forgotten. And really worse than forgotten, we have rewritten the narrative to say that this is what made us special in the first place. This notion that in Yiddish is called kvetching or complaining, ingratitude, my friends. And it's a shame to say that this, and not kindness and religious integrity, is what Jews today are mainly known for. How ironic, huh? In other words, it's Woody Allen and Seinfeld who depict us in the world today, and not David HaMelech and Avraham Avinu. Which is why anyone who actually studies the Chumash could never fall into the trap of believing that the Jews are intrinsically better than the rest of humanity, like the Kabbalists teach today. In how they actually change the literal words of the Parsha to make Israel in the narrative always land on top. Right? They either blame the Erev Rav or create villains out of thin air to blame. But Torah, friends, tells a different story. And what's that story? That if God could use the Israelites, He can use anyone. And that's the reason the Israelites played such an active role in the Torah. It's not because they were so intrinsically special, but rather because they were so flawed. And this wasn't an intrinsic trait, but was rather the result of a slave mentality. And friends, this slave mentality is alive and well today, which is mainly seen with those who either come from or live in what's known as the third world. The notion of taking advantage of people, of being oblivious of others' suffering, or asking for more than you really need, and never being satisfied. And the sad thing is that this attitude does not have to derive from turmoil itself, but it could actually be taught to your children, unfortunately. Then, friends, we see in the Parsha, we see Moshe Rabbeinu doing something that many almost discount and ignore completely from the text, when he tells the Almighty that he can't stand to be around these people anymore, that God should not ask him to be their representative, and that it would be better for him to die than to do so. Now, friends, I'm familiar with the story of the golden calf, and we have Moshe Rabbeinu in an opposite sense stating that if you kill them, you have to kill me also. But then we see that in the same parsha, actually, only a few pasukim later, we see Moshe Rabbeinu coming down from the mountain and ordering the death of those Hashem said he wanted to kill. And friends, this is not just here to teach you that Moshe Rabbeinu was hateful, God forbid, but rather to teach us that you can't love good unless you hate the bad. And this, friends, is a notion that has been virtually ignored by the Jewish world today with this perverted notion of Ahavat Israel, which means nowadays that we have some religious obligation to love all ethnic Jews, no matter their ethics or religiosity. Well, friends, according to the Torah, this is not true, and even according to Chazal either. As a matter of fact, Ve'afta l'recha kamocha has always only meant that one had an obligation to love religious Torah Jews only, and doing it any other way would only be chanufa, flattery, and would also be a desecration of God's name for labeling something unholy holy. And friends, further, this goes on to teach us that according to Torah, Israel is not a race or an ethnicity, but rather a state of being and a concept within the mind of God. But unfortunately, that tone has really changed since secular Jews took over Judaism and even have begun to tell religious Jews how to think. And then, friends, the Parsha goes on to mention the 70 elders who later became known as the Great Sanhedrin, or the Beit Din HaGadol, the right arm of rabbinic authority in Torah Judaism. The text, my friends, specifically says that the Almighty gave them what he gave Moshe Rabbeinu. And later we see that they continued where Moshe left off, to the point that the Almighty even tells us, Lo Tasor, that we should not stray from the right or from the left from what they instruct us, because Elu ve'elu divra that even their ruling should be regarded as the commands that were transmitted by Moshe Rabbeinu himself. In other words, they are where Rabbinic Judaism began and ended. Why ended? Because we have no obligation to listen to any other rabbinic leader after the last Sanhedrin was disbanded. And really, this is a whole video in itself, friends. Friends, if you're hearing me today and you want to become part of the Jewish people, I encourage you, please go to TorahJudaism.org and sign up. And for more information on everything Jewish, please go to BeJewish.org. Thank you.